14.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the discussion session for Tuesday, October 11th. We are going to start off with a review of the agenda with Manager McGill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry, I was multitasking. Tonight's agenda, we will have a public hearing for an ordinance increasing the stormwater fee and extending the effective date of the ordinance. We talked about this several times in the prior discussion sessions. We'll have a public hearing on the capital improvement program for the years 2023 to 2027. We will have the introduction of an ordinance amending the penalty for violations of Chapter 10, Part 12 of the Municipal Code of Ordinances that specifically relates to parking. And we'll also have the consideration of a labor agreement with the Mount Lebanon Career Firefighters Association, Local 5089.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. All right, so this evening, item number 2 on our agenda is the big item. As you all know, Commissioner Foster stepped away from the Ward 3 commission position, and we are lucky enough to have 3 candidates who have stepped up to express an interest in serving the remainder of that term of the commission. And first up this evening, all right, so just to level set everybody, basically what we're going to do is we're going to give each candidate to start out 5 minutes to just introduce themselves. Don't have to use it all, but again, give you some time to introduce yourself. And then we're going to, each commissioner is going to ask 1 question of the candidates, and that will be it for the evening.
And it's the same questions.
Same question for everybody. Mike, you are up first, so you're the one in the hot seat. I would say your last name, but I apologize. I don't want to butcher it.
That's all right. It's Mike Ambrasia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Sound
can.
great.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I regret that I can't be there to join everybody today. I am in San Francisco with what was supposed to be a anniversary week with my wife and my family, and it's turned out than just chasing 2 small children. So that's what you got. So again, great to be here. I'm happy to have this opportunity to present to you and to share my great interest in the Ward 3 seat. It is something that I've thought about in prior years to when moving into Mount Lebanon in 2015. I guess I have 5 minutes now, 4.5 to talk about myself. Okay, let's go. So my background is pretty diverse. It ranges anywhere from commercial development and real estate to finance to robotics and technology. So grew up on Lake Erie in Erie, Pennsylvania, went to IUP, moved to Pittsburgh to get my master's at Duquesne. So I got my MBA at Duquesne, and my wife and I had a beautiful home in Dormont for 8 years and said, you know what, let's move to Mount Lebanon in 2015. We did that. We moved to Woodland Drive. And then a pandemic happened and we didn't know what to do. So we started walking through the neighborhood because I guess we had to start, talking and walking and working from home. And, just by sheer luck, decided to purchase a home 1 block away. So we have further cemented our commitment to our neighborhood by 5 years to the day, moving a block away. We love it. And we did so because of our children. We have a 4-year-old and a 15-month-old. And the dream of walking them to Foster Elementary has been with us since 2015. So we're getting ever closer to that dream. So my background professionally, again, anywhere from finance to my master's in business to spending a great deal of time in commercial real estate and development. And that's where I really immersed myself into I'd say more so the city of Pittsburgh, because in commercial real estate and development, it is a highly charged political environment. And I did that and also elevated to become executive director of the largest commercial real estate group in the state, and building owners and managers. Basically, I was the director and all of my bosses were the owners and the managers of those large buildings that we see in that beautiful skyline of ours. So my job for many years was to work on behalf of their interests, both locally, but in Harrisburg and DC as well. And that's where I got the bug. And you have to do that very well and very strategic, because you have to bridge gaps, in party lines specifically. So you have to learn how to bring people together and get them to communicate so that all stakeholders are moving forward. And I can say that that sounds like a very gushy thing, but I think, as you all know, around that table, that is not an easy thing to do. So I am a student of that. Thankfully, my career has really continued to evolve towards a really bright place, where I candidly turned 40 and I had my first child and said, you know what do I want to do? And I was lucky enough to land with one of the first robotics companies in Pittsburgh, at Carnegie Robotics. It was also very serendipitous. It happened the day that we were moving into our home, our second home in Mount Lebanon, where the CEO's assistant called me and said he would like to speak with you. And I said, when? He said, in an hour. They said, in an hour. I go, oh, well, that's not going to happen. And I didn't even know what I was interviewing for. And I share that on purpose because they don't have my resume and they don't have, there wasn't a job application. It was just 8 months of getting to know each other. And they realized, we want to bring you in to be one of the 5 executives of the whole company. What do you know about robotics? And I said, absolutely nothing. I don't even know if I know how to spell it. And they said, great, that's exactly what we're looking for. So I sit around a table with, there's 5 of us, 4 of which are engineers, 2 are PhDs, and then there's me, and I offer that voice. And the company has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 2 years, and we're on an upward trajectory. So that's my career. My family is my wife, who's a physician at Allegheny Health Network. She is the brains and the brawn of the family. Thankfully, she's part of that family because my 2 daughters are the most beautiful things around. And as you can see me through the screen, it's not much to look at. So I lucked out there. And outside of that, I love what I do. I love my community. I love getting to know people more and more every day, up and down the neighborhood, up and down the streets, going in and around the community. And why am I here? It's an opportunity for really to elevate my community engagement. I think now is the time of ever to jump in and get involved. And secondly, it's to leverage my knowledge, to leverage my background, my track record. Everything I've just shared with you is so diverse. If you look at the community page in the organizations in the commission, on the commission page, and I was kind of chuckling. I was actually telling my wife yesterday, I've done like every one of these things professionally. At some function, in some form or function, whether it be on the historic side. I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Historic Lands Foundation, or the DEI, where I'm a co-leader of those initiatives within our own organization and have a ton of experience in that realm. And seeing the importance of all of the other initiatives, I have experience in doing that. So over the last year or so, in looking as to where I can throw my hat in the ring, I pick, I love all of them. I've done all of them. How can I do it? So having the opportunity to present to you today and speak with you it means a lot to me, because I think that I can have a great impact and influence on all of it. And finally, why I want to get involved, and I promise I'll shut up after this point, it's to help bridge. It's to help bridge and to help give a voice, so to speak, to folks who may not otherwise want to provide that voice. I'll give you an example. When we go to commission meetings or school board meetings, etc., there's a lot of folks that are plugged into that environment. They're plugged into that ecosystem. I submit to you that up and down my street and the next street and the next street, because I hang out with them a lot of folks don't really do that. And I know that maybe we all want people to get involved, and we all want those voices to be heard. We want the nice voices to be heard, not the mean voices, right? But there's a lot of folks in our community, as tight-knit as it is, that need an outlet and they need a way in. And I think that given my tenor and given my attitude, which is very welcoming, that I can help be that voice and help be that representative. That's me.
Fantastic. Mike, that was perfect. So we are going to each ask a question. Again, we've got a bit of a time limit, so we got about 10 minutes to do this. So we will start. Commissioner Grella, would you like to go first?
Sure. All right. So there were originally 2 parts to this question, but I'm just going to ask the first one. Take your time here. What do you believe achieves the best and most effective working relationship between elected officials and municipal staff?
Could you hear it?
Yeah, say that again. I'm sorry.
Sure. What do you believe achieves the best and most effective working relationship between elected officials and municipal staff?
Great question. My time leading an organization as its executive director, I had to learn, for better or for worse, and I have scars, of the way of governance and the way of, following the bylaws and the governance structure, but also what is the purpose of both a board, i.e. a committee, a commission, and the operators, the folks doing the work. And I can tell you that by making lots of mistakes in my career, I was able to find a sweet spot, and I think this may apply to your question as well. There has to be a clear vision. There has to be a clear vision and a clear mission. I see things as being separate. A mission is, what are we trying to achieve? The what. The why is, why are we trying to achieve it? And as the commission is the representative of the people, they identify the what and the why. And the folks that are within the building, within that municipal building, whether it be a police chief or Mr. McGill, everybody, it's to ensure that we are all in lockstep with that clear mission, right? We're going to have topics that come up on a daily. You've referenced stormwater fee. Ask 10 people in the street if they're going to be in agreement with the stormwater fee. They're not, right? But they turn to you and they turn to the staff to give them the answers and to validate the thought. They validate the reason, the why we're trying to achieve it. So I think it's incumbent upon the commissioners to have a great working relationship and not an adversarial one. We can dig deeper and say, hey, it's got to be having, retreats and such, and being able to have social time. At the end of the day, it's about being a good steward and just being a good human being and building that relationship. But as I understand it, there is some really, really great cohesion that's occurring within that building, and that the communication is at an all-time high. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's how I would parachute in.
Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Zimmerman?
Yeah, Commissioner Lemon.
All right. My question is, what is your greatest accomplishment outside marrying your spouse, and why?
That's a great one. Wow, that's a great one. Whoa. And I won't say kids either, because they're in the next room. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Good. My greatest achievement. Wow. I've never been asked that. I've never been asked that. I will say, for in the essence of time, and I'd like to come back to you on that one, but I'm going to answer it the best I can right now. It was being asked to be an executive at one of the first robotics companies in Pittsburgh. And I'll share with you why. I take it to heart what we do, so much so that last week when we were emailing about this position, I was in London. And I was in London at the guest of County Executive Fitzgerald and CEO Christina Casotis at the Pittsburgh Airport. And we were there and we were having some beverages late into the London evening, and I was there to give a talk on robotics. This beautiful venue. We were at the Deputy Ambassador's house. The whole this press was there, Financial Times, The Economist, you name it. And then here's little old me who just got lucky. Friends, my career has just been sheer luck. There's no other way to look at it. I don't have a PhD. I don't have any of that. It's just sheer luck. And the conversation was from County Executive Fitzgerald, who's known me for many years, and I adore him. I'm a huge fan of his. And politically, we don't always align, but I have a lot of affection for him, and he knows it. And he said, "How the hell, excuse my French, did you end up in robotics?" And I said, "Rich, I have no idea." I said, "I think that what we say in this town is that it's so small, don't burn a bridge." And when they were interviewing me, and now I'm over here in London speaking in this beautiful historic place about the benefits of doing business in Pittsburgh, and the CEO of British Airways is right here because he sponsored the event, and about how you have to come to Pittsburgh to do more, to do more work and increase the nonstop flights. I told him, I said, I'm pitching myself still. So, Commissioner Silverman, I'd say that that is one of my most recent greatest achievements.
Thank you.
I hope you also talked to the head of British Air and told him to make the chip flights cheaper.
Well, I tell you what, I had a little bit more to say to him because I was supposed to fly out on the Tuesday evening flight and it was 10:30 and they canceled the flight. So,
Mr. Granny, would you like me to go next?
Yes.
All right. So my question is really simple. What would you want to accomplish with your time on commission? If you have one thing.
one thing, oh gosh, yes. I know what I want to say. I'm just trying to figure out how to say it. It's a fantasy of mine. You know, it's probably no secret that you can very easily Google me and look up my background and all that. But my fantasy is, since I've moved to Mount Lebanon in 2015, I have noticed an undertone of, I don't want to say animosity, I've noticed an undertone of mudslinging from all factions. And it's not just Republican and Democrat, it's even Democrat within Democrat and Republican within Republican. It's a very unique environment. Since moving to Pittsburgh, it's opened my eyes. Our community, our town and our region is very unique. I'm in here in San Francisco and there's no greater, you know, yin and yang that, I mean, San Francisco is much different than it is in Pittsburgh. And then when you put the microscope on our small community, I've noticed this. If your neighbor doesn't align with you politically, or that you want to, you know, put a housing development over here or do something, it's like, I can't talk to you anymore. And I've noticed that. And as we come to know each other, I will share with you stories with specificity that will knock your socks off. Probably won't surprise you, but will knock your socks off as to what I've experienced and what my wife has experienced. So to your question, sir, I'd say I would love to be a part of that solution where we can have open forums and we can have conversations across the aisle and across the table and just kick back with a cup of coffee and say, okay, we have the right not to agree with each other, but let's find at least a way that we can all move forward. And we can do so without having to, you know, you watch too much Fox News or you watch too much CNN. I think we have a lot of that in our little community. And I'd like to help kind of be that bridge.
Awesome. Commissioner Annie?
All right, thank you, Mr. President. We'll wrap it up with this question. I found that it's my network that I've built here in Mount Lebanon through organizations that I volunteered with that's helped me stay in direct touch with the residents and what their residents' needs are. So I'm curious, what's your network here in Mount Lebanon? What local community organizations are you affiliated with that you're currently in regular contact with and you feel like you can easily stay in touch with as you serve in this role? Some examples could include a place of worship or volunteering at the schools, being involved in sports, maybe their profession is here next to you. What's your connections?
Right, great, thanks, great question. And I'd say in retrospect, probably limited to what you're looking for, you know, as somebody who's involved with library board, et cetera, et cetera. That's not me, regrettably. On the sports side, yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We got the library board covered. We meet with them every month. No, we want to.
Yeah, great. Well, so I have a funny thing where I well, let's touch the gamut from top to bottom. You know, on the kids side, our kids aren't in sports yet. So, you know, with the exception of Goldfish Swimming School in McMurray, there's not a lot of networking that's occurring in that chlorine-induced building. But that aside, we're looking very much forward to whenever they grow and I get to walk into school and we get to communicate with families and do that. On the worship side, it's funny because this has been a battle. As I mentioned, it's my anniversary last week, so it's 17 years where I'm Catholic and my wife's Greek Orthodox. So historically, we go to both churches. So either I'm going to Holy Cross or in buying all their food like we did last week, or you know, I'm going to St. Bernard's to get my ashes. So it's funny. I've dealt with that for north of 20 years. and it's not going to change because I can't convert. My mom would kill me. So that's just not going to happen. You don't do that to an Italian mother. As far as like other activities, outside of putting together, the neighborhood basketball game every Tuesday night at Foster Elementary. And I assure you our friends in the school board office love me because they anxiously await for my application every year. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, Mike, thank you very much for taking the time. Hopefully you guys have a great time in San Francisco. And
Tired.
time there, yeah, hey, I think Commissioner Rainey and I both chased children through San Francisco many times. So we know exactly what you're going through. So we will be in touch, timing yet within the next week.
The next step after this is the commission's going to hold a special meeting on Monday, October 17th,
Okay.
which they will discuss the candidates that appear before them this evening and then make a decision at that meeting.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And again, I regret not being there in person.
No worries. That's what Zoom is for.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. You're, I think, welcome to stay on, but you don't have to if you want to go chase kids.
I have to go across street to Girardelli's. So we'll see you. Thank you.
All right.
Good.
All right. Next up, we have Scott Brumley.
Hello.
Hello.
We'll be
You come in, have a
intimidated
seat.
by our formal setup here, but hi. Hi, I'm Mindy Reagan. Andrew Flynn and Commissioner Silverman, so the four of us here.
Scott? Yeah. Welcome. Steve.
Welcome.
All right, Scott. So basically, the way the format is that we'll give you about 5 minutes to just introduce yourself. We won't interject. It is all yours. Sure. And then at the end of that, we will each ask one question. They're the same for every candidate, and then we will wrap up. As Management Guild just reminded us, once this is done, we will have a special session on October 17th where we will discuss this, discuss all the candidates and make a decision. Okay, so 5 minutes is yours.
Great, 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm Scott Brumley. I grew up I was born in Wheeling, West Virginia. I'll start from the beginning. But grew up in Western Pennsylvania, Washington County. So the South Hills was always to me, sort of this dreamland, I guess you would say. Coming up to South Hills Village Mall was always a special trip. So after I got established in life, my wife and I, we moved back to the area, moved back to Mount Lebanon in 2018. I live on Jefferson Drive. So, we looked at Mount Lebanon. We looked at a number of communities in Pittsburgh. We looked at Squirrel Hill. We looked at some other communities in Pittsburgh. And for us, there was really a clear choice. It was Mount Lebanon. It was always our front runner as a place to live and start a family. I have a 4.5-year-old son. And so, for me, Mount Lebanon was always, I say that. Really, and a little bit of not a technocrat, but technical acumen's there. So I've been in a number of various leadership positions in tech, and so very familiar with having to deal with resources, solutions. But that's all right. No, that's right. I like to ramble.
So what do you believe achieves the best and most effective relationship between elected officials and municipal staff?
So, from a leadership position, or from any position, really, the way I think it works best is collaboration, close collaboration. I always like to take an approach to get to know people. People are not just, you're not just dealing with someone who's representing a position. You're dealing with someone who has family concerns, who has a complete outside life outside of what they're doing. So I think taking that into consideration of a personal approach is really important. Close collaboration, I think, understanding their interests, their problems, what motivates them are very important things in trying to find a solution. I think bringing people together is a really important thing too. I think that's where I really pride myself is being able to bridge interests and being able to understand how sometimes competing interests can be resolved and where they can't, and being honest about that. I think that's also a big part is candor and just being honest about where there are limitations and where things can be resolved.
Commissioner Silverman?
Okay. My question is, what is your greatest accomplishment? Marrying your spouse doesn't count. And why?
My greatest accomplishment.
Yep. And why?
So, I think I have a lot of great accomplishments, and it's asking that question is how do I rank them all against each other? I think for me, I grew up, my father was a steel worker and worked at USAP, Universal Stainless Alloy Products. My mother was a nurse. And so for me, the greatest accomplishment was being the first person in my family to go to college and graduate. And not just graduate, but for me, I struggled somewhat academically in high school. And then I found myself in a great environment at Washington Jefferson College where I was challenged and given an opportunity to excel really for the first time. And I graduated magna cum laude. I was a Phi Beta Kappa. Those are all great accolades, but what I'm trying to get at is that when I was given the opportunity to really spread my wings, learn from a whole field of a bunch of different disciplines, I took that opportunity and I ran with it. And so for me, that's the single biggest accomplishment I personally have.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. All right, my question to you is, if you were on commission, if you could achieve one thing in your time on commission, what would it be?
One thing in the time of being commissioner. I think, thinking about the vacancy that exists right now, carrying on the work, right? Understanding what was going on and how can it be improved. I'm not going to say I have the most in-depth knowledge of everything that's going on right now. So I don't want to say that my answer is probably going to be as satisfactory. Again, this is the candor. But living in Mount Lebanon, I want to, I certainly have a view on things. I think I've heard from residents around me about the street I live on being a little bit of a pass through and drivers speeding a little bit too much. So if I could accomplish that, I would say that would be a big win for the immediate people living around me. That maybe putting in a speed bump, I don't know, a couple more, but yeah, I think that would be it.
Commissioner Rand?
Sure, thanks. So I found that my network in my Mount Lebanon organizations I volunteered with has helped me stay in touch with what residents need. So my question to you is, what local community organizations are you already affiliated with, that you're currently in regular contact with and feel like you can continue to represent? Some examples could be volunteering at the schools, your place of worship, sports, professional occupation. Feel free to not share anything that you don't want to stay in touch with the average person.
Yeah, I go to the farmers market up here every week. I think that's a great opportunity to meet people and hear them out. I think there's a number of various community events that happen. There's cleanup in the cemetery that's coming up. I think that's a great opportunity to be involved, to not just do something, not just hear people, but also actually have a hand in improving the community is a big part. I think as a commissioner, to have a public face is important there. So I belong to a synagogue, Bethel, in the South Hills. So certainly members there, hearing from them would be great. Whoever is in Ward 3, but even in general, and I think that's an important thing. So those would be, I have no problems being in a public, public forum to hear people, but those are the things most immediately. I watch Next Door. I think that's an interesting space. I mean, I don't want to delve too much into what's posted on there, but I think there are a lot of valid concerns people have on there that they give voices. They may not show up at the farmers market. They may not show up where I am or where I will be. But I think it's important to hear those voices too, you know, and I think it's important to consider what they're saying. So.
Scott, that is our questions. We really appreciate you coming out and stepping up to, you know, volunteer to do this. It is a big task, but it takes all of us. So we appreciate your time. And as I said, October 17th, we will be having a public discussion to discuss all the candidates and make decisions.
All right.
So tell me.
Thank you everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
We received like an email, right, or some instructions about that meeting, we'll have to follow up,
Yes,
you know.
as I did before this meeting, I would want everybody involved.
All right, so we're just waiting for specific means to bring in the final candidate. Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome. You come right up front.
Hello,
All right.
welcome.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
And then, you know, Mr. Grella,
Hi, Corella. Mr. Corella, nice to meet you.
and then, you know, Phil, and then if you want to introduce yourself over there.
I'm
We're gonna
Andrew
have you
Flynn.
sit right here.
Andrew, Steve.
Introduce yourselves. and-
Nice.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll just wave.
All right. Well, as you get settled, this is a really straightforward, simple process. We give you 5 minutes to introduce yourself. You know, we won't interrupt you. We will allow you full 5 minutes to say whatever you wish. And
But you don't have to take the 5 minutes.
yeah, you don't have to take,
Okay.
you don't have to take 5 minutes. And then we will each ask one question that we are asking all the candidates.
Okay.
And then at the end of the process, we will be deliberating on October 17th in public special session about each of the candidates and then making a decision.
Okay, sounds
So
good.
5 minutes is yours.
I am Ann Swagger Wilson. I have been a resident of Mount Lebanon forever and ever and ever. For a very long time. I know where all the bones are buried, so be careful. No, but I do have a very long history that goes back to volunteering for the Washington Road Revitalization Task Force when it was first formed. It was the precursor to Uptown and then probably to some of your economic development activities here. If I was going to tell you what my strong suit is the built environment. I worked with architects at the American Institute of Architects for many, many years, so I do understand a lot about urban planning, a lot about open streets, a lot about what makes a community strong in terms of built environment. But I also have very strong credentials in finance. When I worked for the AIA, I taught all of their classes to their executive directors, people like myself who ran chapters across the country. I always taught the classes on finance and typically to their board members who surprisingly could not read financial statements. Very scary that they could not. So probably because I started as a banker, so that's where I got my financial background. What else would you like to know about me? I would describe myself as an amiable person. I look at the world through a benign lens. I think most people mean well. And I typically, when dealing with people, especially the public, think that way. I look at it and figure, okay, this is, we're going to put our best foot forward. I would also say I'm committed. I think you'll see that I have a long history with many organizations where I've stayed put and battled it out or worked it out or, worked to strengthen the committee or the company. And I would say I'm creative. I think you'll find that if you have me as a commissioner, I'm a creative problem solver. That probably comes from architects who tend to think in circles like this to get there, but they come up with great ideas. And I have honored that way of thinking after spending so much time with them. I have 3 children who have gone through the Mount Lebanon schools from kindergarten through 12. married to a military man, so I'm a family, we're a military family. My husband went to Iraq twice and then to the Middle East once as a civilian. So I have that experience, which is a little bit unusual for Mount Lebanon, I think. And I've lived all over Mount Lebanon. I think Ward 2, whichever ward Sunset Hills is, and Ward 3 now. So there you have it.
Fantastic. All right, well, we will start with Commissioner Varela.
Great. Thank you.
We'll ask the first question.
What do you believe achieves the best and most effective working relationship between elected officials and municipal staff?
Open, I think open and honest and straightforward. I also think that if I were dealing with staff, I would be dealing primarily with Keith, because I think there is a chain of command, as my husband would say, where Keith is the municipal manager, and he would be the first person to whom I would always go. If he directed me then to another staff person or asked that I work with that person, that would be great. I'd be delighted to, but I would always honor Keith as the head of the staff and reporting to the commission. Mhm.
Commissioner Silverman.
Thank you. My question is, what is your greatest accomplishment outside of marrying your spouse, and why?
I think probably my greatest accomplishment was working with a very diverse group of people. And I said this in my letter, so I'm going to repeat myself, but lowering the barriers for the Fort Pitt Bridge. So when the Fort Pitt Bridge was being reconstructed, PennDOT proposed what's called an F-shaped barrier, which is, I'm trying to remember how many feet high it is, like 9 feet high. It's huge. And it would have kept any truck from going over the sides of the bridge into the river. We've never had a truck do that. And I'm not sure that they were ever going to have one, because we have other things, other supports on the bridge. But we found out that that was going to happen. And also they were removing all pedestrian crossings for the Fort Pitt Bridge. So you know how the trails go around, that would have been wiped out. They were taken out that, exactly. So a diverse group of us worked with a number of people, and we got PennDOT to finally start talking to us. And I'll be honest, because Elsie Hillman called the governor. That's how that happened. And we actually had Carnegie Mellon's engineering department design a new barrier for the bridge that you'll see on it today, because you know, Brendan Gill from the New York Times says Pittsburgh is the only city with its own front door. And to obscure that would have really taken away, I think, from what we have as a city. So I'd say that's my proudest accomplishment. That was a really tremendously large project with lots of different people and you know, a lot of people sniping at us. They didn't like that we interfered and got done.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, my question is were you to be on commission, if you could accomplish one thing, what would it be?
Well, let me say that one of the first things I checked before I decided to apply for this was how funded your pensions were. And when I found out they were 100%, I thought, okay, now that's all right. That's
It
important.
does apply to us, by the way.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like, okay, very important, very important.
You have a fan of the finance director.
No comments for the peanut.
Pittsburgh's like 53%, I think, and I look at that, and I think, oh my gosh, you know, I mean, we're so fortunate. So, you know, I think that really, I don't have any great accomplishment in mind. I think that this is a great boat going forward, and I would be delighted to take a look at where I might tweak things. But I think this is a terrific town that is terrifically well run. And I can't think off the top of my head anything I think you're doing poorly. I even listened to the police interviews. I thought that was great. I know, but it's like so open. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, look at this. You can do this. Yeah. So I'll stop.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Commissioner Anning?
All right, final question. I found that my network with Mount Lebanon organizations and volunteering has helped me stay in touch with what residents need. So that's my question to you is what local community organizations are you affiliated with that you're in regular contact with and feel like you can represent? Examples could include places of worship, volunteering, sports, maybe your professional occupation, or whatever keeps you connected with the average everyday resident that isn't tuning in to our meetings.
Right, oh, right, I know, isn't that the truth? Well, first of all, I own a dog, and this may sound silly, but I met all my neighbors when I moved on to Connecting, because I had a dog and I walked the dog. And, you know, it was
It
amazing.
works.
Sometimes you know the person's dog's name, but you don't know the person's name, but it's, you know, I mean, that's okay. And believe me, they usually give you a peace of mind about what they're thinking, whether you're a commissioner or not. So that's one way I stay connected. I also have two grandchildren, one at Markham School and one at Southminster. And I do a lot of babysitting and a lot of going over to Markham, going to all of the events at Markham and at Southminster Nursery School, where my children went as well. I'm on the Historic Resource Committee, which keeps me up to date. I'm also have done some canvassing for candidates in Mount Lebanon, although not a lot. You know, when I worked for the AIA, I didn't think that was appropriate because I represented a profession and I felt that it was inappropriate and also of concern, because I also ran a 501c3, that I would be perceived as doing anything political, but that was over the edge. So I didn't. I'm just becoming a little more political. A little more, not tons, a little more.
The right amount.
Yeah, hopefully the right amount. Yes, let's hope that. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Well, fantastic. That is all of our questions. As I said, October 17th, we will have a special session where the commission will be discussing all the candidates and we will be making a decision.
Okay,
So thank
Hey,
you
good luck.
very much.
I'm sure you have some great people.
Yes, always impressed. That's always one of the things.
I know,
I
isn't
always
it
tell
amazing?
people is that when people submit for boards in this town, it is one of the most humbling exercises to go through resumes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
What I do in my life.
so we really truly appreciate you
Sure.
coming out and stepping up. I know Ward 3 needs a strong candidate and we are looking forward to getting that person in.
Great. All right.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for your time.
Sure.
Feel free to stick around, listen to the rest of our meetings. It's very interesting today. Or you don't have to.
We have to walk in our dogs.
No, they're not.
Well, wait, but she also does the food thing, food pantry thing. Collects all this money for food pantries for our neighborhood.
Which food pantry?
For the greater Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
community. Oh, it's incredible. You should see it. Makes cookies, all the kids come. Terrific. Yeah. See you later. Bye.
All right, next up on the agenda this evening is item number 3. It is a update on Alcoasand with Gateway. They're across the hall. They are across the hall. So Ms. McQueen is going to bring them in.
It's not going to get filled. It was just like. Call them off guard because we finished early. How I do it.
That's what it is.
Either Andrew, did the candidates know they'd be giving like a 5-minute intro?
Nope.
No.
I didn't think
we-
Didn't seem like, that's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's one of those.
Yeah, they didn't seem like prepared with the script, which is fine. That's one way to do it, as long as it's consistent. It's fine. So it's
I don't like over engineering,
fine.
except on our streets and our sewers. And that's what engineering
All
is fantastic.
infrastructure, all projects, all construction projects.
All right, gentlemen. Sorry, we caught you off guard. You are up with the Alcoasand.
So Dennis and I are here tonight to bring the commission up to date on the baseline due diligence report, which I'm holding in front of me right now. I know everybody wants to hear about everything that's in this book, but we're here to give you a 10,000-foot view of where we stand on things. So just a quick PowerPoint here.
Thank you for distilling that report into this memo.
Yeah. All of that information is in that one memo. Just consider room D.
This is
Uh,
yeah.
Nick, did you hear that? You gotta add Denny to the panelist, as a panelist.
He's gonna.
We do have the memo,
Yeah, just gonna start with that.
and in the time being, I'll send
Yeah, just,
all our
stand up, hold it up for us.
So within the memo, and within the baseline due diligence, just to give you a background of kind of what we did in order to get to that point, was take an understanding of everything that's been done since 2008. Your Exhibit B, which is part of your consent order, and is kind of the defining characteristic of the consent order. It determines where each point of connection or each point Mount Lebanon flows out into another municipality, and where that is on the gold line standard or the threshold. And then that made the determinations of corrective actions that would be necessary as part of your consent order. We came back in, I think, June of last year, maybe even, and then again later in the year to discuss where that initial Exhibit B stood. 17 total sheds or 17 total point of connections that Mount Lebanon is dealing with, which is the most in Allegheny County except for PWSA. So it is a significant number that we're dealing with. Of those 17, yeah,
PWSA, for anybody who doesn't know, is
Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. So essentially the city of Pittsburgh, which, yes,
just translating for our vast television audience.
thank you. So within that, the 17 point of connections, 8 of them were over that threshold, that gold line standard, 7 of which were under, and then there are 2 which are tributary to
Progress.
Turn your speaker completely off.
And with that, so there's 7 that are under the gold line standard, 2 that are tributary to a sanitary sewer overflow. If you remember, that was the basis of the consent order. If you are over the gold line standard, you need to develop projects to get below that gold line standard. If you are tributary to a sanitary sewer overflow, you either need to work to remove that overflow or at least minimize it by 10%. So that was the basis of the order. The first large step that we had was the baseline due diligence process. That baseline due diligence was essentially evaluating that Exhibit B, which is based on the flow from 2008, making any determinations or changes since then. There's been a lot of work that has been completed in Mount Lebanon and Mount Lebanon Sewer since that time. So that is what that book essentially is. It's collecting all that information, all the projects, all the lining, all the studies that have been performed since 2008 to make determinations as to why it should change over time. Once we knew that the order was coming out, we did do additional metering in 2008 or in 2020 in order to get a better understanding of where we stood now. The majority of the work that has been completed since that time was based on defects or issues where it was required to
Shannon has been proactive and with working with Rudy, have worked to manhole line or rehabilitate a number of sewers in that way as well. We've also been fortunate through Alcosan's Grow Grant projects. Those projects are set up in order to remove additional flow from the system. So the Altoona Mapleton project, the Shadow Lawn lining project, Orchard and Thornwood lining, and Cochrane lining have all been completed previously. With that, trying to capture all that information. So while there wasn't a significant change from the total number that were over the gold line standard, it went from 8 over the gold line standard to only 7 over the gold line standard. The biggest change was the reduction of I&I. So there's 8,700 gallons per inch mile day, which is the metric that is used for I&I or inflow and infiltration. And that was essentially what we were able to state has been removed. Ultimately, what that means is that it just reduced the amount of flow that will need to be removed in the upcoming projects. So these projects will need to be completed by 2025, by the end of 2025. And now with this new Exhibit B, which was included as part of your packet, that would be kind of the defining characteristic of the consent order and the requirement of the projects to be completed.
And the idea is just, it's still the projects, but because significantly less reduction I&I is required, it means significantly less cost.
Significantly less cost of the project. Correct. And it did go from 8 that were over that goal line standard to 7. So one whole project was moved
One whole project,
altogether.
but also just the other projects again. Lower
Significantly
cost.
less.
Correct. Thank you.
And with that, we do have kind of a map here too, which I can pass along. Showing the red being the areas of high I&I or over the gold line standard. The purple was just barely over the gold line standard, so less than 10% above that gold line standard. And with that, kind of the next steps that we are looking at following this baseline due diligence completion is beginning to understand where the source of that I&I is coming from and how to develop those projects that we would then replace. This year we're completing flow isolation in a number of sheds, and that is just essentially looking at flow at its base value in the middle of the night when there should be no flow coming in. We actually used a new technology to do this, so we were able to capture flows for over 2 months at a significantly lesser rate than having to fully meter those sites. With that information, we plan to isolate those areas. It's always called like the 80-20 rule. Essentially, 80% of the flow is coming from 20% of that overall system. And with that, once that data is received, we'll be evaluating that into 2023, make any determinations for additional flow isolation, which will need to be completed at the beginning of 2023, and complete the flow isolation report that is required. On the right-hand side here, you see that's actually a schedule that is provided by Weather, essentially outlining the order requirements. That does run entirely to 2027. So with the flow isolation report in 2023, they anticipate that you would begin completing your design and permitting of the project, which would be required by 2024, September 2024, and then final construction on that project of those projects has been completed by the end of 2025.
That seems, I mean, maybe it's very short video. Yeah, it seems like that's.
our way towards that. And actually, that's reason for so hope to stay ahead of that. We expect there to be already out there. You know, we do want to stay out in front, get as much of that done ahead of time as possible. Following that work, you are required to do like a post-construction evaluation, make any determination. The order does just state that you have to design a project. If for some reason it doesn't end up working, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get fined or anything like that. But the whole point of this order at the end, 2027, they want you to collectively work together as a region, essentially to develop the next order. And that'll just be reducing that gold line standard or reducing that threshold. So with that, we want to make sure that we're kind of getting as far out ahead of it as possible, knowing that that's just coming right around the corner and the process will start again. So, like I said, the grow projects, I think the last time I was here in front of you, I discussed some of the grow projects that we had.
Grow. What's
Oh,
the acronym?
yeah, bringing revitalization of our waterways.
And it's basically an Alcosan program where they fund grant projects to see where people can successfully remove I&I, and then they use that to promote it in other parts of the region.
Yeah, and then so it does come from Alcosan, so it does come from the rates that are being paid to Alcosan and redistributed, which is just another reason why it makes sense for us to kind of get as much towards any project that we've done. With that, we did apply for 2 different projects with the municipality this year. And we can go through those in a little bit more detail here in a second, but essentially it was 2. Well, we applied for 5. One was not funded in this round. That was the Beck Snyder Park project. That project, the feedback that we've received so far is just that there are a lot of moving parts with it. So there's a large stormwater component associated with it because the stream is nearby. So it's very difficult to actually make a determination of how much flow would be removed from the work that would be completed. The other one that they, during the initial letter of intent process, they did not think that it was in the right state at that time to apply for an application, was Cochrane Road and Larchmont sewer rehabilitation. They just thought it was too close to the other project that we were proposing for a reimbursement at the time. So they wanted to wait, kind of complete that as 2 separate projects. So they asked us to either complete that work moving forward, and then you can still request reimbursement, which they actually recommend because there's a better chance for getting a higher percent reimbursement, because that is truly just based on how much flow you remove from the system. Otherwise, you're estimating how much flow that you're removing from the system in a proposed project. With that, there were 2 projects that we did apply for. Go ahead and skip to the next. Oh, we did already. The summary of what was awarded. So 2 proposed projects were awarded. These are primarily manhole lining and manhole rehabilitation in 2 of our worst areas in terms of the gold line standard and the consent order. So those projects do have a high price tag of a little over $1.2 million. Alcosan did award about 20% of a grant amount towards that, or $270,000. Again, those are projects that will get us closer to that gold line standard, and something that we would most likely need to complete regardless. With that, there were 2 projects that we applied for that were just routine manhole lining work that was being completed within the municipality. It just happened to be within a significant amount within the region that is over the gold line standard. So we did apply for that in terms of a reimbursement. And already spent, so we are getting $106,000 back in reimbursement there. I have a note there, just that those additional projects can still be performed and then applied for in this next grow cycle round, grow 8, which Alcosan is looking for pre-application meeting sometimes here towards the end of this year. And then their typical schedule is a letter of intent in March and a formal application in June of the following year. And we just heard what Keith led this past month on the most recent round. So that would be kind of the typical round process. So if we were able to complete these projects by March and apply for them as part of a reimbursement process, there's a possibility of going that route. Again, these projects are all anticipated to bring us a little bit closer to our goal on the consent order. I'm going to go down through.
How we Tom was going through.
We're good. Yeah, we got time.
So one of the first proposed projects that we talked about was Castle Shannon. It's near Castle Shannon Boulevard, so that's what we had named it. This one is currently a little over 2,000 gallons per inch mile a day over the boulevard, which is significant. That project in itself is just under $500,000 for proposed cost, and Alcosan was matching approximately $80,000 of that. That is anticipated to get us close, and this is just based on our estimate that there would still need to be additional lining work performed. But that's just another reason why we'd like to complete this work sooner rather than later and perform post-evaluation. There's a possibility when we evaluate this, we're evaluating of a 60% removal rate. If we are capturing those areas that are the worst of the worst, there's potential that we can get a much higher removal rate. So with that, there's a possibility that we can take care of what we need to take care of in one fell swoop. We're able to do the post-evaluation prior to our time frame for completing the other projects, and we would able to deem that our project.
If the removal rate is higher, then we also go back and then get more reimbursement for that, or no, because we got the money in advance. There's no additional money available for that project.
So I believe Alcosan allows for a 15% fluctuation. So these projects are typically in about the 20 to 25% for just a typical lining project. And just to give kind of the bigger picture of that, the grow project, they're really looking for like the combined sewers where someone's taking a large amount of stormwater and taking it out of the system altogether, as opposed to in our case where we're all separate. We're just getting rid of some of the additional stormwater which is making its way in, which is why we're close to that 20-25% most of our reimbursement. But there is a potential for it to move up slightly, but that's again why I brought up the completing a project and then just applying for a reimbursement, because you do have a chance of, if you've removed a significant amount of flow within that, that is a metric just based on gallons of flow removed per cost of the project that they typically base the project or base their award off of.
But just sort of to kind of step back for a second, in terms of how Alcosan is funding this more broadly, right, with the Grow Grant money, are you saying that they are primarily focusing on the combined systems, and therefore the funding for those projects are more robust?
Correct.
Okay.
Or typically in that higher percent.
Higher percentage because you are removed direct sources of stormwater. Let's say you have a combined sewer and there's a stream that you can take out and separate that.
Right.
So it's a huge amount of water.
Sure.
You know.
So
We
state
got our
is
highest,
on their side.
yeah. We got our highest reimbursement, I believe, on the Elton and Mapleton sewer for any grow grant, because that was one we did and measured. And they.
Well, even the first round, when we first applied for Altoona Mapleton, it was denied because they were looking at the overflow that was downstream. You know, we're at the top of the system, flowing every direction. So by the time, you know, we removed a significant amount, they want that overflow. So that's again why if you're Pittsburgh, you're But they did adjust, they adjusted the program. I think specifically because we had that project, we were able to show that there was a significant amount that we were able to make, helps the system, even if it doesn't directly. And they agreed with that. That's why they adjusted the way that they look at it. Not Lebanon. And I would assume would be one of the recipients in terms of number of projects. Yeah, for separate tutors, for instance, this year, I think there was 17 total applications.
But all this is work that we're going to have to do anyway to achieve the goal line standards. So you know, again, we continue to apply, we continue to advance, we continue to know more about what the issues are in the system. So this is just another step into have grant reimbursement to get out ahead. This is going to give us into the system.
Correct. Yeah. So again, it's kind of the step of getting ahead of the game. Take care of these ahead of time. So waiting till everybody's trying to do this.
Questions? So the work that you're proposing on these different, so the one we just saw, the result of the work is we're not under the gold line standard. So we need to show progress toward that. How will that be perceived when we do that project and we don't reach the gold line standard? You know, is that something they come back to us and say, hey, this is great, you've done work to reduce it? Is there an expectation that at some point in the future, we will be literally held to that gold line standard?
There's an expectation. Currently, there hasn't been anything. With that next round of consent order that is expected, there is a possibility that there will be a bigger hammer associated with that kind of that standard or that threshold.
Right.
And they are going to be looking at who is making the, you know, the best ability. So we wouldn't be able to say and complete our consent order, be compliant with our consent order by saying this is the only project that we're doing in this point of connection, because we are showing that we're coming up short. So that's also the reason why I would recommend doing it sooner rather than later, so that we can actually see the result of it and then make that determination of, is it another 7,000 feet of lining that we need to complete in order to meet that threshold? Because we will have to show, we will have to provide a proposed project that is expected to get us to that. That is your requirement based on that.
Yeah, the goal is the goal.
Correct. Yeah. So it would, they don't have a good try kind of piece to it in terms of the proposed project. Now, if you don't meet it, but your, like our design characteristics show that we should have met it based on, you know, based on the work being completed. Because again, it's not a perfect science
Right.
in terms of even the metering and one other thing that we've talked about a lot in the past is that we're still only talking about 50% of the system, we're talking about the public portion of the system. There's a large portion of the system that is privately owned that we're not doing the same amount of work on as we are in the public side.
Good segue to my next question. So when you were in here last, we talked about the technology that you mentioned at the start that allowed you to test for I&I across all these pipes, and some of that is the result of what we have here. And I think at that time, we talked about using that technology to figure out the areas where we might have higher incidences of I&I that we believe to be from those private laterals. So Dan has mentioned many times that there's only so much we can do on the public side and get that extra amount of I&I out of the system. So through these projects, are we able to continue to get a better understanding of where the I&I is on the private side? And are we able to get a better understanding of the contribution or the portion of the contribution to these overall flows that are coming from the private I&I side?
And that is a very good question. We won't necessarily know from what is being completed right now with flow isolation, flow metering, specifically what is private and what is public. However, we're at the point where we are seeing that where, and some of these projects that we have shown, if you go back to the map, just the next page, sorry. That we are lining a significant area, and those specifically are what we're shown as having high I9. We're lining that entire sewer. So from that, when we reevaluate this and it still shows high in that, there's nothing more that we can do on the public side. So that we know that it is coming from the private side there.
So in some areas, we should be able to have a conversation that says, hey, you know, this is where the gold line standard is. This is what we've done on the public side. This is what we have remaining. Our best shot at reducing down below the gold line standard in certain areas will be to tackle on the private side.
Right. And there are different ways to evaluate that. So I think that is kind of coming in that next step of, otherwise, I know Dan, you had mentioned before, you can kind of like site tease or a way to evaluate it so that you are specifically looking at that private side. And I mean, we've talked about kind of sewer lateral ordinance in the past, which was part of this order, but it was just an optional piece of the order and was only functional if you had no point of connections that were over the gold line standard. That was the only time in which they wanted everybody to do something. So even if you had a clean slate and everything was under the gold line standard, they gave the option of instituting a lateral ordinance as an option in order to do something, either that or kind of still removed by 10% or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that the point is that some of these areas, Craig, will be able to better evaluate how much is coming from the private side. Once this much lining is done in the area, if it doesn't address the issue, we're so high, that might be an area that we go in and do some experimentation on adding site tees to laterals, just to check those and, you know, continue this process. I think that there's so much work on the public side that needs to be done first, that's why Alpha Sand's not pushing that as hard right now. They want to make sure everybody's systems are in good shape, get the regionalization done, and push these types of projects before we get to that point. It's coming though. It's coming at some point.
I just had a follow-up, and this is not necessarily directed toward any of the projects that you're recommending here, but just it's funny, and all these time, I think this is the first time I've seen a map that kind of just cuts the municipality like this with blue, purple, and red, mostly just blue and red. I don't know if you've got that up there, but so yeah. So up in the top part, we've got Beverly going into Cochrane, then going into 19 Washington. And then the middle part, just by SMRC 35 MBL03, the red that kind of shoots out over here, right? And so the bottom red was the Shannon project you recommended. Above that to the left. So we've got Washington bordering that. So we've got Beverly, Cochrane into Washington, and then down below on the south side, we've got Gilkison and Connor where those roads intersect. So if we look at, and I'm wondering your opinion here, in all of these areas where we have red, I'm wondering if there's anything we can glean from this map and the topography where we're an infill area, right? Like we don't have a lot of areas where we're worried about somebody, you know, putting a new 5-acre type of lot in, right? This is all, there's not a ton, you know, that someone coming in wants to level a house and do something new. It's not going to be drastically different from what's there today. So, you know, as we step into this comprehensive plan, as we start looking at zoning more holistically, I look at the areas of red and I see immediately around these areas very steep topography, right? And I see areas where in some of these areas, not all, it's more dense, which I think we want in general, right? So I don't see issues with that, but I wonder what your opinion would be for how we can tackle this, right? Because it's not just an underground pipe problem. It's an issue of what we put into these sewers from above too. So I wonder, looking at this, these are the areas that I would say we want to be more dense. And if we're not significantly changing what's underground, do we just by nature of making some of these areas more dense, compound our problem 5 years down the road? And, you know, what would you recommend as we look at these areas? And I think as we have more time to look at this and say, hey, what are these areas and how does that wrap into our comprehensive plan? are these areas that we may need to take a different look at development or zoning or some other program to lessen the effect of what we would likely see on the ground.
So, and that is kind of an interesting kind of thought of it, of, you know, what is truly causing this. In general, in Mount Lebanon, kind of specifically, a lot of older construction, a lot of terracotta pipe that has been there for a long time. The steepness is another point of, we see that often. Terracotta pipe typically has a joint every 3 feet in it. And that's where we see a lot of these issues, where those joints become open. They're in the groundwater table, and that's also why we do a lot of our evaluation and kind of that spring, like late winter, spring season. That's when we would want to complete any additional evaluation here, because you are going to see that. As far as new construction or changing, I would just think that as things change, it would be making sure that people are evaluating those laterals, that those laterals are being updated as kind of things are changing, or as new houses are coming in, that those connections are being made properly. It's another thing that we see all over kind of the region in general. When somebody goes to tap in, they do a true break-in tap, where they take a hammer, break the side of the sewer, and put their pipe in that way. It doesn't happen as much anymore because typically the county's involved in watching that. But
in terms of development, though, there's plenty of dry weather capacity in the system. It's not a lack of capacity. You could add more units if you're talking about building density in terms of a comprehensive plan. I think every project that we do, we take more water out of the system, which addresses the wet weather issues. But on a dry capacity issue, our sewers are plenty big enough. So
yeah, and so in terms of these numbers that we're looking at, GPIMD was being calculated. So that's not the overall flow. That's the gallons per inch mile day, and that is taken only from that extraneous flow or additional flow above that dry weather flow. So new development wouldn't necessarily affect that in any way, other than, you know, if they are doing something to further hinder the main line or pipe. But adding in development should not help that. If anything, adding more total flow to it. There are capacity issues within the system in certain areas, but that's part of the regionalization that we've talked about as well, and the trunk sewers that we're looking at. That's another step, and I believe I mentioned it somewhere along here as well. It is required as part of this version of the consent order to work with San on the regionalization. That's something that we've been working on and talking to San about. They recently provided updated agreements for Mount Lebanon to look at to sign in terms of that as well. So that'll be another step for those trunk lines. But as far as new development, dry weather flow, that would not be an issue that we'd be considering with it.
Very fascinating.
So what's our next decision point? I see a deadline of December 31st of this year to identify projects.
So December 31st.
Projects when you get identified by December 31st, 2023 or 2023. Okay, we're good. We're gonna whole year. Good.
Yes.
With the intent to reduce the INI below the threshold. So when do you need a decision by commission or just a decision on anything?
At this point, this is more of just kind of an update of where we
Right.
stand right now with the baseline due diligence being that this new or exhibit B is the part of your order that is determining what you have to do long term. Kind of the next steps would be most likely coming back either December or January with the results of the previous flow isolation. And if we are saying we think that we need to go and perform the eye trackers is what we use to perform that flow isolation. We think we need to make another round of that flow isolation or metering to gain a little bit additional information. We may be coming to you then to say we need to get these meters and this flow isolation on the ground early 2023. And then we'll be preparing a report May 2023 that will need to be completed. Just making the determinations of all that flow isolation that's completed. And then the next big step will come later in the year as we're developing those projects. Coming back to the commission with those proposed projects will most likely be larger dollar figures.
to that. And we know our maintenance budget yearly. We now have a target with the projects that we're going to need to do. So we're trying to work actively to develop the 2023 SOAR budget. We've not really had to think about that a lot because there's been money there and sitting there ready for these projects to come along. But now we're moving into them. I want to budget each year and we'll show that to the commission. And then you can kind of know as the projects come in that they're funded through that budget.
I'm assuming that especially as these deadlines start approaching and more contractors get locked in, that costs are going to go up. Or assume we're going to anticipate that in our budgeting exercise.
I wait to see it.
It's not only that, Dennis and I talked about it this week. We have mainly two lining contractors in the Pittsburgh area now. That's all we have. They have shortages of resin. They can't get resin to use on the pipes.
Wow.
So we're fighting that issue. So I said, what's going to happen when we throw all these other projects in? We used to think other people would come in from out of town. Like, oh yeah, the construction industry will adapt and I don't know.
Yeah.
I really question it, and you're right. The only way that's going to happen is the prices go up.
Well, when you're
But what's your point of starting early
Blind man.
to avoid some of that fighting development of that?
We've
Precious.
always been ahead of the game, and I think that's why Alcoasand likes us because we're out there doing stuff and we're on top of it. That's why we're getting funded by these growth projects, and I think they're using that to go to other communities to say, hey, this is what you need to do. So we'll continue to move in that direction. And when we're fortunate that we have the ability to do that here.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate the update. All right. We have 10 minutes for board and authorities update. Item number 4 on the agenda.
It's good because I got 4 boards.
All
I
right.
will be sick and I found
Fantastic.
the report on.
Commissioner Randy, you volunteered to go first.
All right. Do you have an update on partnership maps? And then I don't have to take those.
Sure.
Okay, then I'll just take library, historic preservation board, sports and parks. Let's go. So I had the privilege of attending the library board for the very first time in absence of Commissioner Foster. That was her board. Thank you for being so welcoming, Robin, and that board. And they very well organized, great meeting. There's just 2 kind of pieces I took away. One is that they're a primary funding source for them is RAD, and RAD is going to give them less money this year, and we will see that on our budget. Robin has been working tirelessly with them all summer to help negotiate for our library, and I'm sure she'll have a big report on that. But just FYI, our library will be receiving less money. A major funding source in the range of maybe 40,000 less, 50,000 less. I shouldn't probably talk numbers, but we're probably still working on stuff, but it's gonna be less. And then the only other thing, because I want to represent them as best I can possible, I asked the library board what they would like to see in the budget this year, and they requested family leave. I believe that's already going to be discussed in the budget. Paid family leave.
We are talking about instituting a policy related to parental leave
Parental leave. Mhm.
for all employees.
Correct. Yes, that's what I was, yeah.
Potentially be effective January 1.
Perfect. Excited to see that in the budget. That's the library highlights. Parks has been working on a statement of support of our deer colony for the past few months, and they finally finalized that and voted on that. I sent that over to the commission, and I think someone from Parks will come at some point, maybe give a public comment or come on in and say that statement publicly of support of our deer calling program. Parks and sports have been working collaboratively on a couple initiatives. One of them is our science and wayfinding initiative. That was a priority from the Parks and Recreation Feasibility Study. So I think we'll start to see some more traction there coming up. And then also with the Brafferton recommendations, we had a Brafferton meeting with the residents about a month ago that was organized by our municipal planner in Queens. We were there, Craig, and we had a lot of well-attended municipal staff and residents. And some of those recommendations to change the field have already happened. And that was in large part because of the coordination that the sports board did with the sports organizations, especially baseball and softball, because we removed the backstop. So what happened quickly, so the public knows and everybody knows, I think I might have just lost it, but they did make some of those initial changes that were for the very low budget. Backstop it, letting off the field to drainage and repairing any of the most dangerous fence fields. So good news there. I think that's just those are my big ones. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Thank you for the update. Commissioner Silverman, would you like to go?
Let's see, 2 notes. One, the Historical Society fundraiser seemed to go very well. I don't have the fundraising numbers yet, but I was very optimistic things were going well. The other is there's a question about a crosswalk on Cedar Boulevard that will be in live November traffic board meeting. They're still collecting data, so they should have that ready to discuss. It's the November traffic board meeting.
Commissioner Grillo?
Superintendent for school search continues. Steiner will be with the school through the end of the year.
The calendar year or the school year?
The school year, so it goes through June, I believe, 2023. So probably technically after the school year wraps, whatever other things need to be done, but we'll be there the whole year. So technically, the school board has quite a bit of time to, put the replacement in place.
Are they doing, if they're doing a national search or just local search?
I know they're doing a search. I don't know the extent of the search. I will find out and report on that for our next
I
meeting.
believe in my conversation with Ron Davis with the police chief forum, he indicated that they've issued an RFP for consultants to come in and assist them with that process.
Live search.
I'll get more info on the details of it, but yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so for me, so partnership is doing a strategic planning effort right now. They are knee-deep in kind of thinking through the strategy of the partnership, really starting to try to plan for the future of the organization. Doing a lot of great work. As you all know, they had the artist market recently. Thank you, Manager McGill, for being there to help in the morning. Get booths set up in the dark, which is fun. But so they continue to do great work. They continue to advocate for Uptown and all of the businesses and activating the Uptown district. But they are definitely in strategic planning mode with lots of great visions for the future of the organization, which I think is a great partnership for the municipality and community more broadly. Connect is very busy. Connect is having a friend raiser. So staff and commission, you are all invited. A opportunity to get together with other municipalities and all the great work that Connect is doing. They continue to push forward on the law enforcement assisted diversion program that has gotten a lot of funding. They are working with the county. They are working with the state and working with federal agencies to really implement law enforcement assisted diversion. That's really around implementing, help giving resources to police officers to divert people who are having drug problems primarily away from the jail system and into alternate support mechanisms. So that is being kicked off in a couple different municipalities. There's a lot of support for those communities. I know that Chief Louth was involved early in the process, but we are not engaged directly, but I know that they have been involved in the process. They also had a Future of Fire conference about 3 weeks ago now. It was a very great session. The challenges of fire in this region are very interesting. We are very unique in that we have a fully, a strong paid department and a strong volunteer organization. Most municipalities are all volunteer. So they are struggling with, getting new volunteers. They're struggling with funding. They're struggling with really the future of how do you provide fire services in the region. So they had the state commissioner for fire come in, had a great panel of professionals. Chief Sahoyta was there. I was there. Very good discussions on how do we think about fire services in the region going forward, because this is clearly a challenge that it was interesting. The statistic is that in the 1970s, there were about 300,000 fire volunteers in the state, and now there are about 38,000. So the structure of how fire safety is performed in the state is evolving. And so the question really is, how do you provide continuity to those types of services? Chief Sahoyta has been very active in these discussions. I think we are a great example. I think the question is, how do we continue to lead and support this type of transition? Because it is a challenge that a lot of our neighboring municipalities that we work with are going to be experiencing. So Connect is doing great stuff. The Environmental Sustainability Board is working actively on a variety of topics. They're looking forward to the opportunity to participate and give feedback. Against plan, and they are starting to look at policies, specifically areas of existing policies that we have, and wanting to make suggestions to where we might make changes to improve long-term sustainability. But that meeting is coming up on Thursday, so more to come on that front.
I'm curious on the lead side.
Yeah.
Is Connect's role in that just to kind of play facilitator between the program managers and stakeholders and communities?
Yes, Connect is actually, they are the program managers right now, right? Because the county hasn't wanted to pick it up fully at this point, so Connect is acting as that coordinating mechanism.
Got it.
Right, Connect is getting the funding to provide the staffing to facilitate the coordination, all right, to really get the program up and running.
Yeah.
To prove the test case out, which is really what Connect is good at.
And then the goal would be to have a certain number of municipalities sign on, certain number of municipalities use those programs, measure it, and determine whether it's effective with some level of metric that they determine is what they want to look at. Okay.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really trying to prove it out. I mean, it's a national program,
Yeah.
right? But it's still relatively early days.
Yeah.
And so this is really the first, attempt in this region to build the mechanisms, and provide the resources to the police, train the police, again, put it all together. So it's an innovative opportunity to, push on this and try to address some of these challenges that the jail is facing, that police departments are facing, that our residents are facing. So
Yeah. It was mentioned by all of the potential
it was.
chief candidates we brought in. So it'll be interesting to see how we can fit into that.
Yeah, I've been watching. I know, our police officers have been watching this. They've been paying attention. So I think, as this evolves, we're in a good place, already. I think so. Some of these communities that are taking this first cohort are really in need, in a much more dramatic sense than we are. But I think we can definitely support and continue to learn to see how we implement these types of programs if it makes sense.
One more real quick, coming up to the planning board on October 18th, you're going to get another chance to review the proposed townhouses development along the T tracks near Pennsylvania Boulevard.
Very good.
What stage is that on? Did
They're
they get
coming
preliminary?
back, they did got preliminary,
Okay.
they're coming back to the next round of approvals.
All right. And with that, we are over time. So we need to do these 15 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a good evening.